All right, our next session is mental health navigating support. And I am going to introduce Malinda Marsh, who will open it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Uh, this session, talking about the mental health and how to navigate support, is a serious conversation. The majority of people with profound vision loss experience significant psychological morbidity. Let's break that down. Significant psychological morbidity. Significant, we all know what that is. It's something serious, something not minor. Psychological, that's our state of mind, well or not well being. Morbidity, this refers to the gravity many with an LH1 diagnosis have experienced, including an attempt or consideration of suicide because of this diagnosis. Let's just pause there for a second, because that's pretty harsh to hear. An LH1 diagnosis affects our mental health. Today, I'm going to share with you a resource LH1 Collective worked with a clinical psychologist to create to help our LH1 community be mentally healthy, living either with this disease or as a family member or sighted supporter affected by LH1. The first topic that needs answering is what is in this book that could be most useful to you. This booklet is written by a mental health professional to other mental health professionals using plain, approachable language. The first section identifies the following: the need for mental health to be addressed after an LH1 diagnosis, an explanation of LH1, an introduction of the psychologist who was the author of the booklet, an explanation of grief as an experience that includes loss, and guidance for therapists of do's and don'ts to best work with a visually impaired client, as well as protective factors that assist with mental health for an affected person with LHON. The second section identifies 14 distinct roles one might experience as a part of the LHON community. They include LHON affected individuals from affected teens, affected young adults, affected later in life, and an affected LHON, an LH1 affected parent. Then there are the parent roles within the LH1 community, and they include a parent of an LH1 affected child, a parent of an LH1 affected teen, and a parent of an LH1 affected adult. With the maternal inheritance pattern of LHON, the next roles focus on those life experiences based on this diagnosis pattern. They include the mother of an LH1 affected youth or adult, and the woman carrying an LH1 mutation, whether she is affected or unaffected. The next grouping considers those in the LH1 community who have a close family tie to someone who is LH1 affected, and they include a sibling of someone who is affected, or a spouse or partner of someone affected, an adult child of someone who is affected, and the last grouping is someone with non-vision symptoms or LH1 plus. After these unique roles are discussed in a succinct one-page format, the last section of the book includes a resources page for additional support that can complement the mental health services someone is receiving. Now that you are familiar with what's in the book, how can it be helpful to you? Find the parts of this book that most relate to your perspective within the LHON community. Every role listed experiences loss with an LHON diagnosis. That grief is experienced from a different angle based on your individual LHON relationship. Read your page or pages. Use this book to validate your personal journey. Since an LHON diagnosis affected you or your family member, and then use those unique pages that relate directly to you to guide mental health professionals to provide more focused, direct assistance tailored to your grief related to LHON. So in summary, this mental health booklet was written by a mental health provider as a guide to her fellow mental health providers so that our LHON community could better engage with their mental health provider to receive the most efficient and compassionate mental health assistance possible from our individual therapist or psychologist. It was written because an LHON diagnosis affects our mental health. The two next steps that I would like you to consider after this presentation are first to read your specific page or pages today. Don't wait. That relates to your role in the community. And second, please talk to me or Dr. Jonathan Dator, whom I would like to introduce now, directly with any feedback you have about your page or the overall book. This is your book, and it needs to be impactful and relevant to you. Dr. Jonathan Dator is the director of the Center for Counseling and Consultation at St. John's University. He is also affected with LHON vision. We are honored to have him speak further on the psychological impact of our rare disease and action steps we can take. Thank you.
Okay, so it's great to be here and to be able to speak a little bit about mental health and LHON. And what I really want to do is talk about mental health in general, talk about how someone with LHN could be impacted, and then get into tying it all together with how could this booklet be useful? What would make this useful when meeting with a therapist? Maybe providing this with a therapist. As was just shared, this was written by a psychologist for other therapists as well. And so this is useful for you all to read today, but it's also useful in terms of I can give this to someone else. This is actually, and I am not the person who wrote it, but I read it over and I want to talk a little bit about it because it was so well done. And I really want to be able to highlight in what areas it was well done and how you can begin to initiate that conversation with a provider. If you feel like you're nervous about that, and we'll have time for questions at the end. Maybe someone in this group has already done this, and I'd love to hear about that. Um, but to kind of start backwards a little bit, like how do we get here? Like how do we get to having this booklet right now that we can provide? Because I will tell you, as a licensed psychologist who, yeah, I'm right now the director of mental health at a university, but I also do private practice as well. And so sometimes I'll get referrals. People will meet with me who have different genetic conditions or physical health problems, chronic diseases. And I don't know much about it. And I'm scrambling to learn about it so that I can provide the best care possible to them. There isn't just a booklet on their diagnosis available. And so this is really a gem that we even have this year. Um, but how did it come to be is really, really important. So I, I was getting my master's degree in counseling, and about midway through, I thought, I think I'm done. I just want to get my license and begin doing therapy. I really love doing therapy. Um, but it was maybe like 5, 6 years since my diagnosis in 2003. And I was very active at that time, much more than I unfortunately can be now because of other life demands, but very active on the email listserv that used to exist, on the Facebook page. And anecdotally, just talking to people, it was like, people are really struggling with this. We have no data on this. Like I was looking up, are there any articles on the mental health side of things? Nothing. Uh, Not even a lot on disability in general, because as a researcher, there might not be research on what you're interested in out there that's been published and peer reviewed, but you want to look and see, is there anything that is like along the same lines? And still very little. And so for me, it was really about like, I think I want to pursue more school so that I can do more research, and a PhD would allow for that. So I knew entering my PhD program that I wanted my research to be focused on mental health impacts of LHON. And in my second year project, I was able to look at the psychological well-being of individuals who have been diagnosed with LHON. No shocker here, and I'm glazing it over just because I don't want this to dominate most of the time in the presentation. I want to get to other things related to how to navigate therapy. But no shocker, high levels of anxiety, depressed mood, perceived social support was really the key for how individuals coped at that time. Literally in this booklet, that's shown to be a protective factor, right? This is a protective factor. You all showing up today. Somebody brought you here because they wanted you to hear this and they love and care about you enough. You brought yourself here maybe because you love and care about yourself enough to say, I wanted to come to this conference. I wanted to come to this particular talk. I want community. And so that's a protective factor that was seen in that study. But as I began talking to more and more people, I was noticing a lot of people who are struggling the most aren't affected necessarily with vision loss. It's some of the unaffected carriers, like mothers and siblings who are not yet affected. And so I really wanted to make that the focus of my dissertation, and was able to write a 167-page dissertation. Did a lot of research on those particular populations and showed that siblings experienced higher levels of anxiety than regular population groups, and mothers experience depressed mood and sometimes feelings of guilt. And so this all makes sense, right? In terms of what maybe some of your own personal experiences have been. And then the key was like, it shouldn't just stop there. And so Dr. Alfredo Sadoun was able to continue the research. We had conversations about it. They then completed an online survey as well, and surveyed individuals with LHON on their psychological well-being. That became a journal article that was published. I believe it's one of the resources in this booklet, so feel free to check that out. Also happy to provide that information via email if anyone needs that after this. And then that led to this, right? Like, because I think how we started here was, let's talk to those who are affected. Now let's talk to those who are unaffected carriers. Let's publish an article about this, because let's face it, a lot of providers out there are not going to read a 167-page dissertation, but they're going to read Dr. Sadoun's article because it's a research article. It's much more digestible. But then I think this next step became, okay, well, what happens when someone's in therapy? How do you let their provider know about what's going on? And I will share with you one of my first experiences as a psychologist in training in 2010. I was doing a very beginning internship, really my first one. And I had been meeting with a client who was originally from India, parents were from India, and she was stressed out in therapy because she was not wanting to do the arranged marriage that her parents were proposing. I want to keep going to school. I don't want to do this arranged marriage. And I remember going to my supervisor and saying, this is great. I'm really connecting with this client. We've now met 3 times. She's opening up to me so much. I'm learning so much about her culture. I didn't know anything about it. And my supervisor said to me, but you've kind of wasted time because you should have already known that. You should have been doing your own research on this person's background and this culture. Maybe it won't be their exact experience because we all have within group differences from our own experience. All of us in this room are maybe living a similar experience, but in our own personal way, it's a little different. Um, but that stood with me. I mean, I'm talking about it 15 years later because it really stood with me, because I realized she's right. My supervisor's right. We now spent 3 hours meeting with her teaching me about her culture. That shouldn't have been on her back to do that. I should have been doing some background. And now I make sure when I work with people in therapy that I've done some work on what brought them in, if it's something I don't know a lot about. And so that's the beauty of having a booklet like this that is written by a mental health provider for mental health providers, is you can provide that to a therapist and say, hey, this is something about me. This particular section, as the 14 sections were just read off, this is applicable to me. This is why I'm coming to therapy. I really am struggling. Or it might be, this is actually not why I'm coming to therapy. I've really worked through LHON in my life. I'm coming to therapy for this other reason, but I still want you to know that this is a big factor in my life because this is there. We wake up to it every day, as you all know. Um, that doesn't mean, I just want to say this first, it's so important. That doesn't mean like, all right, here's the booklet, therapist, I'm done. I don't have to talk about LHON ever again in therapy. No, like it still should come up. The booklet is to provide them some background, some information. It should still be part of your conversations that you have in therapy, because it's probably a big part of the conversations that are happening throughout your life every day. I just got here from the airport this morning. It was part of many conversations, getting assistance through the airport, getting to the baggage, getting to the hotel. It's a part of every conversation. And so for it not to be a conversation in therapy wouldn't be very useful. So this is a tool, but it's also a part of the continued conversation of how we get the work done in therapy. Um, so to talk a little bit about mental health, disability in general, LHON vision loss more specifically, it's really important to look at disability as a diversity variable. And I was really struck by the talk right before this about how do we connect different groups and different populations so that we're not just isolated. And that's what I was thinking the whole time during the last presentation. I was sitting there thinking that's very similar to this, you know. How do you define yourself? Do you call yourself legally blind? Do you say blind? Do you say visually impaired? Do you say low vision? Do you say I have a disability? Do I say you say I'm a person with a disability? I have a disability. I am disabled. It's up to you. You get to be the one who decides these things. It's not for me to sit here and say this is what it should be. But I think when we make it a diversity variable, and it should be, it's because individuals with disabilities are the largest minority group in the country at 20%. That's growing as we continue to have an aging population. That's going to continue. This term scares a lot of people, but we're all temporarily able-bodied. We don't know how healthy we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years or what other conditions could come our way. And so to know that that's something that is a vulnerability as well. Can provide some research too that it's a variable that could lead to some more mental health concerns that some people might experience. It's a variable that can impact individuals' risk for physical harm, or women with disabilities are 4 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than those who are not. And so this is data that's important because we want to make sure that we're recognized as part of these populations too. There's 2 different ways to kind of look at this, which is one, there's the medical model of I have a physical health problem. It just needs to be fixed. And then everything will go, I just need to fix it and everything will be better. And then there's a social learning model, which is more of uh, the world should be built for everybody, not just for individuals who don't have visual impairment, but things should be more accessible for every single person. I wish it was like that. Sometimes it's not, but it's a beautiful thing when you can walk up to a hotel and there's a ramp everywhere you go. It's a beautiful thing when you can hear the elevator talk and when you know that what the room number is because they made the number so big. It's not like that everywhere, but that's kind of the goal. Is how about looking at it from a little bit of both, right? As we heard in the last talk, the goal is a cure, right? Everyone here would love to be able to see. Again, I wish none of us were here because it never happened, but we are here now. And so, what do we do with that? And there are people who aren't here today who maybe will eventually be here in the future. Who we don't even know this exists yet. And I really think intersectionality is important. That's the last thing I'll highlight. When it comes to mental health concerns, it's good to look at developmental stages of time of our life and also other possible identity variables. So we know from tons of research that individuals between the ages of 18 and 27 are most likely to develop a mental health condition at that age range. This includes schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, official diagnoses of borderline personality disorder, other significant levels of anxiety that maybe weren't there before, first onset of potential chronic depression. And so, when do we know most people develop LHON? Of course, these numbers vary, but it can be between 18 and 27 as well. And so, how do you deal with a diagnosis of vision loss on top of a potential separate issue of mental health illness? And so, these are things that are not separate, but they intersect with each other. What's it like being a person of color and maybe being oppressed or marginalized, and yet also having to deal with LHON vision loss? What is it like to be identified in the LGBTQIA plus community, coming out for the first time, and then also having LHON vision loss? Is one harder than the other? Are they both difficult? Yes. It's not one or the other, it's both. And they intersect with each other. They're part of who and how we are. And so it's really important to look at that too and to think deeply about that and to recognize that all of our experiences are a little different. And the last one I really want to mention when I talk about identity, because it'll lead into the next section about accessing mental health care, is socioeconomic status, right? Like, what if you can't afford transportation? That's a protective factor. It's listed in our booklet here as a protective factor. What if you can't access it? What if you can't afford it? What if you live somewhere that it's not available? What if you don't have that community that can get you from point A to point B? What if you can't afford a therapist? What do you do? And so that on top of a mental health diagnosis with LHON can be very challenging. So really wanting to make sure that this isn't just cut and dry. This talk was not supposed to be, this is what happens if you have LHON. This is just what's going to improve your mental health. No, it's a journey that's separate for everyone, although we're in it together. And so last point here before we get into our fireside chat, which I'm excited about, is accessing mental health care. And I want to preface this by saying this is very United States centric, probably. In other countries, it might be easier, it might be more difficult. Um, I'm a licensed psychologist in New York and Rhode Island, so navigating the system here is unbelievably difficult. In New York City, we probably have a therapist on every corner. There are still 6 to 12 month waiting lists for psychiatrists right now. There's still about a 3 month on average waiting list for a psychologist for individual therapy. And so to know that there could be a long wait, what if they don't take my insurance? How do I even look for a therapist? And so I kind of wanted to talk about how do you find a good therapist that might be the right fit for you? And then also what type of therapy would be beneficial for someone who's dealing with maybe the beginning of LHON diagnosis or who's had LHON for a long time. Um, and I think there's some very good websites. The American Psychological Association has something called a locator. You can look for a therapist in your area by entering your insurance, your zip code, or your lack of insurance. Psychology Today, it's just psychologytoday.com, has a list of providers. What that will often do is it will show all the insurances that they take, what their expertise is. The nice part about Psychology Today is there's also a click that you can make as a therapist saying, I'm a blind allied therapist. Do I even know what that means as a blind person who's also a psychologist? Not completely, because I've noticed almost a lot of therapists have that checked off when I search the site myself, and I'm wondering, but do they have any training? You know, have they read a booklet like this? Like, where are they getting that from that they're saying that they're a specialist in this area? And so how do you know? You don't know until you know. And so what I think is really important is you're looking for a therapist. Any solid therapist will provide a 15 to 20-minute free phone appointment in which they'll talk about the way they do their work, how they approach therapy, what type of therapy they do. And I'm going to get into different therapy modalities in a second. But if they're saying, I don't provide a free 15 to 20-minute consultation, it's $200 your first appointment. It's your intake, which is usually what the first appointment's called. I would say, you know what, maybe move on to the next one because there should be that ability to talk to a couple different people uh, for 15 to 20 minutes and say, this person feels right. I feel their energy. I think I could work with them. Or they're talking about a type of therapy I would not want to do. Never mind, even though they seem very skilled. That's not the right fit for me. That sounds like it is the right fit for me. I want to work with that person. And so I use the word fit a few times. How do you know if a therapist is a good fit? It's kind of based on where you're at right now. So I might be a very good fit as a psychologist for somebody in right now in their life. 5 years from now, they might be dealing with something that I'm not an expert in. And I might say, you know, I know we worked before in the past together, but I could refer you to someone that specializes in what you're going through. I'm not a specialist in that. And so knowing that the fit is often the fit right now, it might not be the fit all the time, but recognizing what am I looking for in therapy? What is helpful for me? Some therapeutic modalities I'd recommend for someone with LHON is acceptance and commitment therapy. That's a very mindfulness skills-based therapy. What it's essentially, to break it down as barely as possible, because I could go on for a whole appointment about that for an hour with everybody here, is accepting where I'm at right now, coming to a place of acceptance with what's going on, because what will often happen is we'll fall into avoidance instead of accepting the things that are taking place. And when we avoid, we can't actually get the work done. So accepting things, then kind of becoming more present focused on the things going on, An example of that might be if I'm really anxious about all this work that I have to do tomorrow when I get home. But what could I do about that right now? I can't do anything about that right now. I'm here in front of all of you. And so being present with where am I at, right? What could I do about what's happening right now? Um, and then from there, committing, acceptance and commitment. So committing to the changes I want to make in my life, committing to living my life a certain way. I commit to wanting to be a psychologist. All right, what do I have to do to go through that path in life to get that career? That's what I'm committing to. That's how I'm going to spend the next 2 years of my life doing that. I'm committing to being a good partner to my significant other, a good son to my parents. What do I have to do? How could I work on that with a therapist? I'm committing to leading a fulfilling life, even with LHON. What do I have to do to make that happen for me? That might be different for me than somebody else here today. And then another form of therapy I'd recommend is if you see any therapists that do cognitive behavioral therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy looks at how do we reduce catastrophizing thoughts. A catastrophizing thought could be, I'm running late for my presentation today. That's a thought. That's okay. That's not good, but that's the thought that I have. A catastrophizing thought might be, I'm late for my presentation today. I'm always late for everything. I'm a horrible human being. I'm a loser. I have now turned myself into a monster instead of just I'm late today. And so we build things up onto a mountain. And then how do I work on it when I've now called myself all these names? So what cognitive behavioral therapy is very good at is being able to say, let's challenge the thought. Let's challenge the negative thoughts that I'm having. Are they true? Sometimes they turn out to be true, but they're often not true. And so, what could I do to really challenge that? What's the actual thought? How do I pivot my thinking from more negative to positive? And when we're losing our vision, there's a lot of negative thoughts. The word suicide was just mentioned, and that's real. People have had those thoughts. It's okay to talk about that here. We should. It's a myth that if you talk about suicide, it's going to make people more suicidal. Actually, it makes people less suicidal because it's being able to be put out there in the open. And so being able to recognize that it's okay that I'm having it, it's a thought like any other thought. Here's how I can work on it, changing the way that I think. And that's very, very helpful, especially in times like this. And that it's okay to think negatively too every once in a while. We're not just trying to fake it till we make it, throw it all under the rug. Because I don't know about all you, but when I'm at home and I throw everything under the rug, there's no room anymore under the rug. And I have to eventually take it all out. And now it's harder when it's all under there. So really being able to work on things at a time and go from there. So those are some therapeutic modalities I'd recommend, but it changes. You know, if I've when I was just diagnosed, I don't want skills. I don't want homework for at least for the first few weeks. I just wanted someone to listen and talk to me. I wanted to process. I wanted a therapist who could process with me. Then it was like, all right, how do I get some skills so that I don't have to be in therapy forever? Teach me some stuff to do in here that I could do on my own. And knowing what's right for me right now is really the key. Um, so that's some background into mental health and LHON. And, you know, as someone who's also affected and is a psychologist, I will say that this is just real and we deal with it every day and we want to be able to talk openly about it. So I appreciate that the committee put this on the schedule and I appreciate that I could be here and talking about it. And so really great privilege to be here in front of all you, happy to talk afterwards. But I really thought, and we talked about this as a group before doing this presentation, it would be really helpful to get the perspective of someone who's kind of experienced multiple layers within this booklet. Because some of you might have heard the 14 sections and thought, well, wait a minute, there isn't just one that I should read. I could fit into 3 of those 14 categories. I could fit into 5 of those 4. Maybe last year I was in that category. Now I'm in this one. Or I'm a parent of a child with LHON, but I'm also a parent of a young adult with LHON. It's both. Um, and so, you know, I really thought it would be helpful for us to do this fireside chat today and really get to connect. And I want to give Julie the opportunity to introduce herself, and then we'll kind of go there with the interview.
Hi, I'm Julie Poincenot. So yeah, let's go. Let's get going.
Sure. So you have a sibling who lost their vision, and I just want to talk about and ask you if you could describe what was the emotional impact like when your sibling was affected, when he began losing his vision. What was that like for you personally, but also for your whole family?
Absolutely. So my older brother lost sight when I was 16 years old. It was the first time we had ever heard of LHON. He went through the whole medical mystery tour, which was obviously scary, shocking, to watch your older sibling go through something like that. But then obviously coming to the diagnosis of LHON was even more scary because, you know, this is how he will be for the rest of his life. And then finding out the whole family connection and what that means is a lot, especially as a 16-year-old. So, I mean, questions and just so many unknowns. It was definitely interesting to go through, but terrifying all at the same time.
And to follow up with that, as I was saying, in the beginning here, there was some research that showed individuals who had a sibling who was affected, even if they're unaffected, experienced higher levels of anxiety than a typical population. So at that time, if you could remember, were you experiencing anxiety, thinking, well, now I know that this is genetic, it's hereditary? Could I get this at some point? Was that a thought that was happening? Was that a thought that wasn't occurring for you?
I would say both. I think I definitely went through stages of being absolutely terrified, stages of avoidance, and thinking that if I don't think about it, then maybe that will help. And like I said, being 16 years old, you think your whole life's ahead of you, and so thinking about all the different factors and will I go blind? Will I not go blind? Should I think about this kind of thing? Was all of the things running through my head at all times. So my answer is yes to every part of that because I think again, there's so much life ahead of you. All you can think is, well, what are all the answers? And I don't know what's going to happen.
Sharing a similar experience, when I first found siblings and told them, they said, that's not true. That can't be us. And it was like that denial piece. So
Mhm.
definitely getting that side of it too. Um, and then if you're comfortable sharing, now being affected with LHON vision loss, what were some psychological symptoms you experienced? And if you want to process and share with us as much as you're willing to, just when you had vision loss onset, what was that like for you in the beginning?
Yeah, of course. And just before, I guess I'll just touch on. So I did actually go to therapy, maybe a small number of times back when it happened to my brother. I think this actually would have been really helpful at the time, though, because as a 16-year-old, I definitely did not have the capacity to explain to anyone how I was feeling. So I could see how this would be really helpful to be able to explain that, because I kind of didn't want to go much longer because I was not really in a space to be able to explain it. But then, yes, so then 6 years ago, when I started to lose sight, very different experience. I kind of course, right? Like you don't think it's going to happen to you. And even if I've watched my brother go through it, that won't be me. And then it was. And, kind of how you mentioned the idea of just waiting for it to fix itself. I literally have screenshot after screenshot after screenshot of horoscopes that said things are going to turn around tomorrow. And so I have like this whole grouping of them. I'm sure I could find them like day after day. I was like, okay, it's coming tomorrow. It's coming the next day. Like it will happen. It will turn around. I also am Lissa's daughter. So if anyone's going to turn this around, it's going to be Lissa's daughter. Didn't happen. But if anyone should be better about it than everyone else, if anyone else should be quickest to get to that finish line of being able to figure it out, it's Lissa's daughter, Jeremy's sister. So I was like, I should be able to get there, but then add self-shame onto the list of all of the things that you feel, right? I'm like, I should be feeling better faster. And I don't. And now it's like, I'm even more ashamed because it's embarrassing. It feels embarrassing to go from fully sighted to losing sight and not being able to do the things that you can do anymore. And I was embarrassed every day at work, embarrassed every day wherever I went because I would grab for things that weren't, in the wrong place. And you just feel, I don't know, like you feel broken and ashamed and embarrassed every day. And it is very hard to sort of go through that and continue to try to see how you can get to the other side. I remember my mom saying like, there's a way, there's a light. And I was like, where is the light? I don't see it. Like, help me get there. But no one can. I mean, of course, like you said, there's so much support in other people. So yeah, no, I have also been saying this to anyone who's around their 1 year mark that is here, literally like applause to you, props to you. I am so impressed by anyone that's here in like their first year, because I did not want to be anywhere near anyone at all with LHON for the first year. Didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to think about it. I even think I called you, John. I wanted to try to talk to people, but was definitely not in the right place. So very, very hard. And my brother says this, but I actually think it's true. It's because it almost feels like you have to grow up again. It almost feels like whatever you've grown up in life to, it's bringing you right back down to zero, and you need to do your own growing up again. So very, very difficult. Completely agree with everything we're saying, that it's a lot to get through, but it's important to find a way.
Thank you so much for just sharing that the way that you shared it, especially mentioning shame and embarrassment, because those are emotions, those are emotion words, and that was really what you're feeling, and I think everyone here probably felt that because I know I did. And so to talk about one of the things you said, just for a follow up, because we are talking about how helpful community is and how helpful the knowledge is. You don't have to go through that mystery. You probably knew from the beginning, but like, oh, this is what's happening. But was there also this pressure, like, because this is who my mom is, this my brother went through it, he's doing well now, I'm supposed to just be doing well from the beginning? Was there any of that, or were you able to give yourself the grace of, no, this should be hard for a year?
No, definitely thought definitely thought I should be there, and was not there. So definitely a lot of the hard parts, but I don't think I gave myself any grace until finally getting to a better place. Then I do. Now I'm like, oh, it was so hard on myself, but
Yeah.
it's tough. It's hard I think it's hard on everyone. Everyone's place to go through this is so hard. So like I said, like super impressed by everyone that's here too.
So one last question. You had said you had been in therapy before your own diagnosis. What was therapy like then? And then if you were in therapy after, how was therapy different? What about therapy was helpful? What would you say wasn't useful?
Yeah. So like I said, I mean, when I was 16, really didn't have the I wasn't really in the right place for it, to figure it out myself. But when I lost sight, it was very difficult, for one, to try to find a therapist. I remember I was looking on one place, my mom was trying to look on another place. They all had long waiting periods. I remember I went through my insurance for one avenue. I had an employee assistance program at work, so I went through that on another avenue. And we ended up both finding a therapist at the same time, or that had availability the same week after months of waiting. And so we were like, what do we do? Do I cancel one? And we said, I'll just go to both and kind of see how it feels. So I went to a woman therapist and a man therapist, and saw them both in the same week. And they were very different, both lovely, but very different. And in my therapy session with the woman, she sat me down and she did a guided loving meditation. No,
Imagery, maybe?
maybe she did a guided meditation. And whereas went to see the male therapist, and he we sort of very leather couch, like sat down on his leather couch, very much felt like a therapist's office. And we started to kind of work through it, and he started to say, like, this is very difficult. Obviously what you're going through is hard. And then by the second session, he said, I spent some time researching since our last session, researching LHON. And I really think let's start working through like what we need to work through. And granted, some days we were working through it together. Others were much tougher and, just crying on his couch. But to me, he was more what I needed in the moment. I'm a big fan of meditation, though. I would say I have a lifetime subscription to Calm. So I love meditation, but in that moment, it wasn't a guided meditation that I needed. What I needed was someone who was going to be tough with me and say, like, yes, I know this is difficult, and but let's work through it. How are we going to get you closer to that acceptance? And like, let's work through those steps. How are we going to make this day a little bit easier? What are some tools and tricks that I can give you when it does feel hard, to get you back down so that you can keep working at your job and you can keep moving on to the next thing? So I ended up sticking with him, obviously, and stayed with him for a number of years. And it was always, like I said, very Some days much more just, I need a moment, but a lot of days it was very tough and let's just work through what's the next thing. And it really was all about getting to that place of acceptance, because honestly, that is the light that my mom had told me about. Because, and again, that doesn't mean that there's not hard days. There are still very many hard days, but once I could accept that this is the place I was going to be in, once I realized I wasn't going to be cured miraculously like in a month's time, like, and again, that took me about a year. The life started to change. The thoughts that I had, I mean, constantly thinking in my head, I was single at the time. Who on earth wants to date someone that's legally blind? Who would want to marry someone that's legally blind? But fast forward 6 years, my husband is the person that told me, I'm going to this conference with or without you. I wouldn't even be here if he didn't force me to come years ago. Then that's the kind of support, right? Like that
Yeah.
you said, there's people out there that do care about you and want to help you see things get better. But it wasn't until I was able to get to a place of acceptance that I could start being that person for myself too, that could kind of work forward in my career, work forward in my steps, and work to moving myself forward.
I love that. And the beautiful part about what you said to me was that the therapist you didn't choose, there wasn't anything wrong with it. In fact, you love doing meditation, but it was like that wasn't the type of therapy I needed in that moment. And it's great when clients can tell me that. Sometimes I'll have a client say that meditation exercise was the best thing I ever did, and others say that was the corniest thing. I'm never doing that again. I won't see you. Um, or some will say, give me every skill, give me homework to do when we're not meeting. And others will say, I'm so busy all week, I have enough work. I don't want you giving me stuff when we're not meeting. And so being able to have the conversation together and recognizing, what do I actually need right now? Actually communicating with the therapist that, hey, this was helpful. Now it doesn't feel like it is. Where can we, work to improve what we're doing in therapy? And also recognizing like where you're at in your life, because maybe therapy isn't the answer in that moment. Maybe it's a group, maybe it's individual therapy, maybe it's getting involved in your community, maybe it's all of the things combined, whatever it is for you to get to that place of acceptance that you were able to get to. And yeah, that's really all I had for us. But if anyone has questions, I'd love to hear those too, because I want to make sure there's plenty of time for that.
We do have a hand. Is there a mic runner that can bring the mic to Joey? Thank you so much.
I actually have two questions, if that's all right. The first one, I was wondering if you had any information or resources for people with low vision who also have ADHD, because something that I have come across is that oftentimes the tools that are available in therapy for people with ADHD are not tailored towards us at all. And the second question that I have is, can you speak on some resources for affected people going through emergency mental health situations, where there might be a little bit more to it than just the chance that you would have when you're interacting with a regular therapist? Also, thank you so much for this presentation.
Yeah, of course. I guess I'll answer the second part first. I might actually answer with a question, which I hate doing, but I'm just going to do that. Um, by emergency services, you're talking about if someone's feeling suicidal, anything like that.
Yes.
Okay.
And to disclose on that, I have I have discovered myself that at least in my local area, there is absolutely no training on blindness whatsoever, and nothing is accessible there. So adding on top of the stress of all of that, it is the additional stress of just like they don't understand the concept of large print.
Okay. So in terms of emergency services, I would definitely recommend 988. It's both a text line now and a phone line. So if you call that, you can speak to someone. And I think when we talk about suicide too, it's important to differentiate what the thoughts are, because if someone is having suicidal thoughts, that's very typical. Most of us have had thoughts at some point in our life, different level of seriousness and severity, but most people have thoughts. But when it reaches a point of, well, my thoughts are now turning into, I'm Googling things on how to do it, or I'm thinking about ways in which I could end my life, then in that case, I think it becomes all right, not only should I reach out to 988, I think 988 is helpful if I don't have a therapist right now and it's 2 a.m. and I need to text somebody and I don't know who to tell that I'm having some passive thoughts. A passive thought is sort of a thought of, it'd be so much easier if I didn't exist, right? Because there's no plan. There's just it would be easier if I didn't exist anymore. That's a passive suicidal thought. That's a time to reach out to someone, whether it's a therapist or the 988 emergency line. Have that conversation because they'll usually then be able to provide you with services in your local area on that phone call or that text line. But if it's an active thought, which is the planning thoughts that I was discussing, then it's not a 988 call. It's more of a 911 call and being able to get to your local emergency room so you can get assessed by the psychiatrist in the hospital who can say, okay, we've got to get you an inpatient or we got to get you a partial hospitalization program, which means like maybe doing an intensive therapy during the day and still being able to do your regular work schedule half the day. Or an outpatient service, which is we're going to get you set up with a therapist now. No more calling people, not getting answers, being on a wait list. We're going to have to find someone for you immediately. So that's when the hospitalization could be helpful. In terms of ADD, that's such a good point because ADD does require a lot of, especially in therapy, a lot of therapists will do things like fill out these worksheets on how you manage your symptoms this week. And that's hard if you can't really see to do the worksheet or if it's not in large print or if it's like, oh, this is one more taxing thing I have to do this week, or maybe do I even want to go to my therapist this week? I forgot to do the worksheet. And so in that case, I think it's a conversation with the therapist about, all right, this is going to actually be more of a barrier for me than not. And what symptoms of my ADD could you give me some suggestions on? So like, let's say it's a processing speed issue with ADD, because some people, that's very typical with ADD. For those who don't know what processing speed is, it would be, let's say I have to get to work at 9 a.m. and I'm always late and someone says, well, just get up earlier. You'll be able to get to work on time. I'm still late even though I get up earlier. That's usually because I might be in bed on my phone thinking I've got all the time in the world. Or I could take my time, getting ready this morning because I got up earlier. I think I have more time than I do. And so all of a sudden I'm still dealing with the same problem, even though I did the thing people told me I should have done. And so figuring out like what are the exact symptoms with the therapist and then having that therapist provide suggestions maybe because I've done this as well where it's like, all right, let's provide some things we can do this week. Let's take the baby steps. Let's work on this issue this week. Talk about it in a week, how it went or how you weren't able to do it and talk about what made it hard to do it. Then maybe a week or two after that, getting into another symptom or barrier of ADD that could be challenging with vision loss. Rather than here's some worksheets, do these for our next session. More of a one-on-one type of like in vivo therapy where you're like, these are the exact things we're going to tackle this week. I'm not going to give you like a checklist of 20 things you should do. So being able to tell the therapist, I know this might be a hard conversation, but hey, this isn't going to work for me this way. I need it done this way. And being able to see, are they open to that? Are they receptive? If they're not, then do I need to make a switch? I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
We do have time for another question if there's a hand. There is up in the front of the room. Thank you so much.
I was surprised that you didn't mention in the first part, skills, grief counseling. You mentioned cognitive and acceptance, but no grief.
So in a way, grief therapy is still very much intertwined with those things. So, but thank you for pointing it out because I think it's important to say that this is a loss, right? This is grief and loss. This is a major life loss, and it's not just one. There are other things that we're losing. A great point, Julie, even saying at work, like the loss of the ability to do certain things that I was doing at work before that came without thinking. And so it's the addition of like so much more thinking that has to happen about everything you're doing throughout the day and how to do it or who to ask and how to ask. Am I asking for too much? Am I not asking for enough? To then the loss of just the ability to do certain things on my own. And so with CBT and more so ACT, it really gets into being able to process not just the stages of grief, but also the fact that they're not linear. The stages of grief are supposed to be what am I feeling right now? Am I feeling denial? Am I feeling anger? Am I just feeling the sadness of the loss? Am I feeling like everything's fine and knowing that maybe it is today and I can accept that versus having to worry about like when is it all going to get bad again? Because we'll often fall into that impending doom when we're experiencing grief, which is I can't even let myself have a good day. I know tomorrow's going to be a hard one. And so thank you for bringing up grief because while it is intertwined with some of the therapeutic techniques I mentioned, I didn't use the word, and that's a big part of why we're all
I
here.
just wanted to make sure I wasn't taking a step back if I went that direction.
No, not at all.
I also wanted to throw out with all the many people having to wait for a therapist that my neuro-ophthalmologist in Chicago actually has 2 on her team and immediately recommended someone on her team. For 3 months. I get to use someone once a week. So I don't know if that's an option for anyone, but maybe ask your neuro if that's an option. So,
That's great.
Thank you, Chris.
so I'm lucked out at Northwestern.
I'm gonna let Rob go next.
Thank you very much. I guess as someone affected with LHON, in a matter of weeks to months, sometimes the things that we thought we were, the people we thought we were going to be, the titles we gave ourselves that make us proud, some that feels like it's taken away, stolen away. And my question is, what's the best thing you think we can say to ourselves or do for ourselves to help overcome some of those thoughts? And as well, our friends, loved ones, sighted supporters, what do you think the best thing is they can say or do toward us to help with our journey in mental health moving forward? I guess that's a 2-part question.
They're both great and so important. I think what other people could say that's really helpful is just what do you want to say or talk about? Being able to like open questions versus, oh, I understand what you're going through. Because it's like, no, there's no way. There's no way. And I was hearing that a lot in the beginning too. And it actually got to a point of being irritating because it was like, you don't understand what I'm going through. I'm losing my vision. How do you understand? You're not losing yours. And so there's things we say like, I'm so sorry. Oh, I understand what you're going through. That must be so hard. Some of those are okay, but they can feel like pity. And we don't want that. The intention's good, right? The person meant well, but the impact wasn't so great. It didn't feel good on the other receiving end. And so just asking questions like, hey, what do you kind of like what we did here? I said to Julie, whatever you're willing and comfortable to share. Because I wasn't going to just say to her, well, I know you're affected. Now tell me about it. It was more of a, what are you willing to share here? What kind of thoughts are you okay with saying? So asking questions in that way that's more open. And then really the important thing you just asked was, how do we talk to ourselves? I think knowing that it's going to be different and difficult, but it's all manageable and doable. And that might sound like easy for someone to say who's like 22 years later, like myself, because I did not think anything was going to be doable or manageable within the first year or two. But knowing like how all the things can still happen. There is someone out there who will fall in love with you and will marry you and will tell you to get your butt to the conference. You will still get the degree if you want that degree. You can do it. Like it was a nightmare and so many bumps in the road and so many times I want to cry in the fetal position and say I want to quit tomorrow. There's still days I say that at my job now because it's like, oh, this is so much harder than it has to be. But it'll get done. And if people can't understand that stuff might take me longer, they have to understand. And it's weird for me to say that because it took so many years for me to say that confidently. I used to think I got to prove to everyone that I could do it just the same or just as good. And it's like, I can do that, but I also might need more time and they'll have to understand that. They have to understand it. And I don't have to explain everything to everybody all the time, but because sometimes it's exhausting. You want to just give everyone at your job a paper and say, here's who I am. Like, so I don't have to tell you today and there's a new person tomorrow. But realizing that I think if you really believe that something's possible, it can happen. It's just like, how do I do it? Contacting people who are doing the thing. That's what I learned how to do because I never was like this. You have to figure it all on your own. It's very much like our individualistic culture in some ways, I think, of like, you're just supposed to be churning out quality stuff all the time and with no excuses. And it was like, no, all right, there's a blind psychologist in Wisconsin. Let me contact her. Hey, how did you do it? Like, how did you get your degree? How did you do all this? It seems so impossible. And, we would talk on the phone sometimes and um, finding mentors who really are doing the stuff you might want to do. Or maybe if you're single and struggling with that, how did you find love and fall in love? How did you know that it was possible again or at all? And knowing that these things are all manageable. And maybe it's with a therapist, maybe it's with a friend, maybe it's with another person at the casual portions of a conference like this. But talking to yourself in a way that, okay, yes, it's going to be different and it's going to be hard, but this is all possible still.
Before we move to the logistics aspect of all of the fun choices for dinner tonight, this was such an impactful session, and I'd love to thank Dr. Jonathan Dator for his time today and his expertise. And I'd also really like to thank Julie for her openness that we could all relate to.